If you walked away from an avoidant peacefully, no begging, no drama, just calm, and you're scared it made you forgettable, I need you to hear this. That fear is one of the most human fears you can have, because it isn't really about them. It's about what your calm exit seems to say about your worth. When people leave loudly, we assume it mattered. When people leave quietly, we worry it didn't. We worry that silence equals weakness, that dignity equals being overlooked, that not fighting means we didn't love enough. And if you've been with an avoidant, that fear gets even sharper, because their nervous system is already trained to detach. So you start thinking, if I didn't chase, they won't feel anything. But let's name what's actually happening inside you. Your mind is trying to protect you from the pain of being dismissed. If an avoidant can look calm after losing you, your brain tries to explain it, and the easiest explanation is, I wasn't important. That explanation hurts, but it feels like closure. It feels like control. Because believing you didn't matter is painful, but believing you mattered and they still left is even more confusing. So your mind grabs the story that ends the uncertainty the fastest, even if it's not true. Now listen closely, peaceful does not mean powerless. Peaceful means you chose not to abandon yourself. Peaceful means you refuse to perform pain to be taken seriously. Peaceful means you stopped turning your love into proof you have to submit in court. But because you've been trained by the dynamic, you might not feel powerful. You might feel like you let them win. You might feel like if you don't make a scene, they'll think they got away with it. And underneath that is the deeper wound. If I'm not dramatic, I'm not memorable. That's why this keynote is such a strong hook. It speaks directly to the viewer's private shame and doubt. The viewer isn't just grieving the relationship. They're grieving the idea that their love didn't register. They're grieving the fear that they were easy to lose. They're grieving the image of the avoidant moving on like nothing happened. And that image makes them want to do something, anything, to be felt, to be seen, to be counted. But the truth is, chasing does not equal being valued. Begging does not equal being remembered. Drama does not equal impact. Those things often give an avoidant exactly what they need to stay comfortable. A story that makes you the reason they had to pull away. When you chase, they can say, they're too intense. When you plead, they can say they're needy. When you explode, they can say, this is why it couldn't work. And that story protects them from the one thing that would actually force growth, accountability. So if you walked away peacefully, you didn't give them that story. You didn't give them a villain. You didn't give them chaos to hide inside. You didn't give them an easy script. You left them with the uncomfortable truth that you could love them and still choose yourself. And that, to an avoidant nervous system, is not forgettable. It's destabilizing, because it removes the hidden comfort they often rely on. The assumption that your love will keep chasing, no matter how distant they become. And this is where the viewer's fear needs to be challenged gently but firmly. The fear that calm means you didn't matter is backwards. Calm often means you mattered so much that you finally protected yourself. Calm is not indifference. Calm is the decision to stop proving your worth to someone who kept you in uncertainty. Calm is the moment you stop measuring love by how hard you can suffer. The peaceful exit also does something profound for your own nervous system. It stops the addiction to reaction. In avoidant dynamics, your nervous system gets trained to respond to their distance like an emergency. You text, you explain, you chase, you try to restore closeness. That chase creates temporary relief, and relief becomes addictive. So when you walk away peacefully, you break the addiction. And the first thing your nervous system does when the addiction breaks is panic. It whispers, what if this doesn't work? What if they forget me? What if I should have said more? That panic is not proof you made the wrong choice. It's proof you're withdrawing from a pattern. So the keynote is a direct message to that panic. It says your dignity is not invisibility. Your calm is not a weakness. Your peaceful exit is not forgettable. It's the one move that can't be rewritten, because it doesn't give them a reason to blame you. It leaves the truth standing. And even if they never admit it, the truth is what lingers in the mind long after the emotion fades. Because someone can forget your begging. They can dismiss your anger. They can label your pain. But it's much harder to forget a person who walked away with self-respect, who didn't chase, who didn't collapse, who didn't perform heartbreak for attention. That kind of exit doesn't just close a door. It changes the way they see you, and more importantly, it changes the way you see yourself. Stay to the end, because a peaceful exit isn't invisible to an avoidant. It's one of the loudest things their heart will ever feel. This second keynote matters because it challenges the most common assumption people make after leaving quietly, that if you didn't fight, you didn't matter. But for an avoidant, the absence of drama doesn't equal the absence of impact. In fact, drama often protects them. Peace removes their protection. That's why a peaceful exit can echo inside them in a way your begging never could. Think about what an avoidant is used to. They're used to reactions. They're used to pursuit. They're used to you trying to get clarity, trying to fix, trying to be understood. They're used to emotional intensity being the thing that allows them to retreat and justify their retreat. When emotions rise, they can say, "This is too much," and their nervous system gets permission to shut down. Drama gives them an escape hatch, because it lets them blame the intensity instead of facing the deeper truth, their own fear of intimacy and responsibility. A peaceful exit removes that escape hatch. It's the one thing that doesn't match their script. You don't chase. You don't bargain. You don't plead for one more conversation. You don't demand closure. You don't beg them to understand. You simply stop participating. And that simplicity is what makes it loud. Because now they can't tell themselves you left because you were impulsive or dramatic or unstable. They can't rewrite the story to protect their ego. They can't say you pushed them away with chaos. You left with dignity, and dignity is hard to dismiss. Now on the surface, a peaceful exit can look like it doesn't land. They may look calm. They may look relieved. They may even act like nothing happened. But the avoidant's first response is not always the truth of their heart. It's the truth of their nervous system. Their nervous system is wired to reduce pressure. So when you leave quietly, the immediate pressure drops. The conflict stops, the expectations pause, and their system can feel relief. That relief is real, but it's not the full story. Relief is often the first layer, not the deepest layer. Because underneath relief, something else starts to form, and this is the part people don't see right away: confusion. Confusion because you didn't do what they expected. Confusion because they can't categorize you. Confusion because your absence isn't noisy enough to blame. And that confusion quietly turns into a question. Why are they not chasing? Why did they leave so calmly? Do they mean it? Are they really done? That's where the peaceful exit becomes loud, because it forces them to face uncertainty. And uncertainty is what you've been living in, but now it becomes theirs. Here's why that matters. Avoidants often regulate relationships through control. Control of closeness, control of distance, control of vulnerability. If you chase, they still feel in control. Even if they don't like the pressure, your chasing confirms you're attached. It confirms they can withdraw and still keep you emotionally near. So the bond never fully breaks. They can disappear and still sense you waiting. They can return and receive warmth without repair. The relationship becomes a revolving door, and they stay comfortable because the door never truly closes. A peaceful exit closes the door without slamming it. And that is exactly why it echoes. It creates a clean absence. Not an angry absence that still speaks to them. Not a begging absence that still reaches. A clean absence that removes your emotional energy from their system. And when your emotional energy is gone, they feel something unfamiliar, the reality of you being unavailable. This is where the avoidant heart starts noticing. Not always in a romantic way at first, but in an impact way. They start noticing the space you used to fill. The reassurance you used to provide. The warmth you brought. The way you made things easier. The way you stayed. And because you didn't leave in chaos, they can't file you away as a problem. They're left with the uncomfortable possibility that they lost something good. That's why peaceful exits often create delayed grief. Avoidance can postpone feelings through distraction, but they can't erase attachment forever. The feelings often arrive later, when the noise is gone and the absence has become undeniable. They might start missing you at night. They might feel a pull when they pass places you used to go. They might think of you when something happens and you're not the person they can tell. They might suddenly want to check if you're still there. And this is why hovering happens, the random, the like on your story, the casual question. It's not always love. Sometimes it's a test to see if the door is still open. So this keynote builds curiosity because it promises something specific, that your peaceful exit has stages. And those stages are loud in their heart even if they pretend they're fine. It tells the viewer, don't judge the impact by the first reaction, because the first reaction is often defense. The deeper reaction comes when the absence becomes real. And most importantly, this keynote reframes the peaceful exit as power. Not power over them, power back in you. Because whether they admit it or not, the most unforgettable kind of goodbye is the one that leaves no mess to blame, only the truth to face. Here's why: when you don't chase, you remove the one story their nervous system depends on, that you were too much. And suddenly they're left with only one thing: reality. This third keynote is where the entire psychology becomes clear, because it explains why peaceful exits hit avoidance so deeply. It's not because you hurt them. It's because you took away their easiest defense. You took away the label that kept them comfortable. Avoidants often manage closeness through a protective narrative. They don't always say it out loud, but their nervous system quietly believes something like, people get too intense, love becomes pressure, emotions become demands. If I get too close, I'll be trapped. If I'm needed, I'll fail. If someone sees me fully, I'll lose control. That narrative helps them rationalize distance. It helps them justify pulling away. It helps them feel safe when intimacy rises. And when conflict happens, it becomes even easier to cling to that narrative because conflict can be used as proof. See, it's too much. See, relationships are exhausting. See, this is why I need space. So, when you chase, when you plead, when you send paragraphs, when you react intensely, even if your reaction is completely understandable, it can unintentionally strengthen the narrative. It gives the avoidant a simple explanation that protects them from deeper accountability. It allows them to say, they were too emotional. Instead of facing the harder truth, I pulled away because closeness scares me, or I avoided responsibility, or I didn't know how to show up consistently. The too much story turns the spotlight away from their avoidance and onto your humanity. That's why it's so devastating for the person who loves them. Because you're not too much, you're just asking for the basics: clarity, consistency, emotional presence. But the avoidance nervous system interprets those basics as pressure, and then their mind grabs the too much label to defend the retreat. It's not fair, but it's common. Now here's the turning point. When you walk away peacefully, you remove their evidence. If you don't chase, they can't say you begged. If you don't explode, they can't say you were chaotic. If you don't plead, they can't say you were needy. If you don't perform heartbreak, they can't say you were dramatic. And that's what makes a peaceful exit so loud. It collapses the story. It removes their ability to file you away as a problem they had to escape. It takes away the villain. It takes away the excuse. It takes away the emotional smoke they could hide behind. And what's left when the story collapses? Reality. Reality that you were calm. Reality that you were mature. Reality that you loved without losing your dignity. Reality that you walked away without trying to punish them. Reality that they weren't pushed out by drama. They were faced with a person who chose peace. That's uncomfortable for an avoidant because it puts the responsibility back where it belongs. It forces a question they can't easily avoid. If they weren't too much, then why did I pull away? If they weren't the problem, then what did I lose? If they could leave peacefully, does that mean they were stronger than I assumed? Does that mean I misjudged them? Does that mean I took them for granted? This is where the avoidant's heart often starts to shift, but it doesn't always look like romance right away. It often looks like a subtle destabilization, a slight restlessness, a checking behavior, a curiosity that comes out of nowhere, because the story they relied on to feel safe is gone, and now they have to face uncertainty without the comfort of blame. And this is also where your power returns, because you stop participating in the argument about whether you were too much. When you chase, you're still in the courtroom. You're still trying to prove you're reasonable. You're still trying to be understood. You're still trying to get them to validate your pain. But when you leave peacefully, you stop arguing your value. You let your behavior speak. You let your absence speak. And that silence, the silence of not defending yourself, becomes the loudest statement. I know what I deserve. Now, let's be honest about what happens next. In the beginning, the avoidant might still look calm. They might still distract. They might still act like it's nothing, because their system will try to restore the old comfort quickly. But because you didn't chase, they can't rely on the old evidence. They can't rebuild the story as easily. And that means the feelings they avoided can start creeping in later, not as a clean confession, but as a pull to check if you're still there, a pull to test the door, a pull to see if your calm was real. This is why avoidants often hover after peaceful exits. They want to restore the story, to restore control, to see if your absence is temporary. A small hey, a like, a random message. It's not always love, it's often a test to see if they can regain emotional access without facing the reality your calm created. And that's the final truth inside this keynote. Your peaceful exit doesn't just remove their story, it removes their leverage. It stops distance from being a tool that brings you back. It stops silence from being a button they can press to get your attention. It forces the relationship into truth. Either they step into accountability and growth, or they stay in avoidance and lose access. Either way, you stop being controlled by the label, too much, and you start living in the only place you ever needed to be, your own peace. At first they may look relieved, but relief is not resolution, and I'm going to break down the exact stages that start happening inside them after your calm goodbye. This keynote is important because it stops people from making the wrong conclusion too early. The biggest mistake someone makes after walking away peacefully is watching the avoidant look fine and deciding, see, I meant nothing. But the avoidant's first reaction is rarely the full truth of their heart. It's the truth of their nervous system trying to regulate, and those two truths are not the same. For an avoidant, conflict and emotional intensity often feel like pressure. Pressure activates a threat response. So when you leave calmly, the immediate pressure drops. The arguments stop. The expectations stop. The uncomfortable conversations stop. And yes, their nervous system can feel relief. That relief is real. But relief is not the same as closure. Relief is simply the absence of immediate demand, not the absence of attachment. That's why this keynote sets up the stages, because their internal experience often unfolds over time. It's not a straight line. It's not instant regret. It's a sequence. Stage 1 is surface relief. They breathe out. They feel space. They tell themselves it's better this way. They might even become more active socially, more busy, more distracted. They may appear unbothered. This is where most people get fooled, because the avoidant looks stable while you feel devastated. But what you're seeing is control. Control is their comfort. When they can label the situation, when they can put it in a box, they feel safe. Stage 2 is the crack. This is when relief starts to fade and something subtle appears, restlessness. Because once the nervous system calms, the mind starts noticing what's missing. Not in a romantic way at first, in a practical way. They notice the routine shift. They notice your messages aren't there. They notice the space where your attention used to live. Their brain may try to ignore it, but the absence keeps showing up in small moments. And because you left calmly, they can't fill that absence with blame. They can't say you exploded, so they have to sit with something more uncomfortable. They left quietly. Stage 3 is confusion. Confusion happens because your calm goodbye doesn't match their internal story. Avoidants often prepare for someone to chase or react. They expect emotional bargaining. They expect messy closure. Your peaceful exit removes that. So their mind starts asking questions. Did they mean it? Were they really done? Why didn't they fight? Why are they so calm? Did I misjudge them? Did I push too far? Confusion is important because confusion creates attention. It pulls you back into their mind. Not because you begged, but because you didn't. Stage 4 is the quiet becoming loud. This is when distraction starts failing. The initial relief is gone, and now there's a specific kind of emptiness that shows up, the absence of your emotional availability. When you used to chase, they could feel you there even in silence. When you leave peacefully, they can't. And that's when they start feeling the consequence of their distance. They start remembering you in flashes, the way you made things softer, the way you cared, the stability you brought, the comfort of being understood without being pressured. This is where missing begins. But missing doesn't always show up as, I want them back. Sometimes it shows up as a dull ache, as irritability, as a sudden urge to check your profile, as the feeling of being unsettled for no clear reason. Stage 5 is the ego hit. This is where many avoidants start, checking. Not always because they've become emotionally mature overnight, but because your calm exit signals something their nervous system notices. You are not orbiting anymore. Your absence suggests independence. It suggests you can move on, and that can feel threatening to someone who used distance to manage the bond. They may start wondering if someone else is giving you attention. They may start feeling possessive in a way that surprises even them. Not because they suddenly know how to love well, but because loss threatens control. Stage 6 is the reach. This is where hovering often happens. A casual, hey alike. A message that tests the waters. And the reach is where your viewers need to understand something crucial. A reach is not automatically repair. A reach can be a test to see if the old access still exists. It can be a way to soothe their discomfort without taking responsibility. Or it can be a genuine attempt to rebuild with maturity. The difference is not in how sweet the message is. It's in whether they can acknowledge the pattern and offer a plan to change it. This keynote is powerful because it teaches the audience to stop judging impact by the first frame. Avoidants often look calm first because calm is their shield. But peaceful exits remove the easy narrative and force a delayed encounter with reality. And when reality arrives, it often arrives quietly in stages, and those stages are exactly why your calm goodbye can echo inside them longer than any dramatic goodbye ever could. Then comes the part that shocks people. Your calm absence becomes a mirror. It reflects what they took for granted. And that's when missing turns into an ego hit, and they start checking for access. This keynote matters because it explains the moment the avoidant's inner world shifts from, I feel relieved, to wait, what did I just lose? And the reason it shocks people is because most people assume the avoidant will only care if you cry, only value you if you beg, only feel something if you make them feel guilty. But avoidants often don't move through emotion the way you do. They may not respond well to intensity, because intensity activates their defenses. What they respond to, often without realizing it, is the absence of emotional availability. Because that's when their coping strategy stops working. In the old pattern, your presence was more than romance. Your presence was a stabilizer. Your attention was a comfort. Your consistency was a safety net. And even if they didn't openly acknowledge it, they relied on it. They could pull away and still return to something warm. They could go quiet and still feel you there. They could keep the relationship in a gray zone and still receive emotional benefits. You were not just a partner, you were the emotional system that kept the bond from collapsing. So when you walk away peacefully and you truly detach, your absence becomes clean. It's not an angry absence that still screams, "I'm hurt." It's not a bargaining absence that still whispers, "Please come back." It's a quiet absence that removes you from their nervous system. And that's why it becomes a mirror. A mirror shows what exists when you're not filling the space. It reflects what the room feels like without your warmth. It reveals what they were receiving without realizing it. At first, they try to avoid looking into the mirror. They distract, they stay busy. They tell themselves they're fine. But the mirror is everywhere, because the mirror is their daily life. It's the moment something happens and they can't tell you. It's the moment they want comfort and you're not there. It's the moment they scroll and realize your energy isn't reaching anymore. It's the moment their phone stays quiet and they realize the quiet isn't random, it's consequence. This is where missing begins, but it starts as impact, not romance. Impact is the feeling of something is different. It's a subtle discomfort, an emptiness, a restlessness they can't easily name. And because avoidants are not always trained to sit with emotion, they often interpret that discomfort as a need to restore access, rather than a need to reflect. That's why the next step is often checking. Checking is not always love. Checking is often control. When an avoidant feels that quiet impact, their nervous system wants to return to what was familiar. Familiar is your availability. Familiar is knowing they can reach and you'll respond. Familiar is knowing the door is still open. So they start testing the reality of your detachment. They might check your social media. They might watch your stories. They might like something. They might send a casual, "Hey." They might ask an innocent question that isn't really about the question. It's about whether you're still accessible. It's about whether they still have a place in your emotional world. This is where the ego hit comes in. Because your peaceful exit didn't just remove drama, it removed your dependence. And to someone who unconsciously relied on distance to manage closeness, your independence can feel like a threat. Not because you're trying to threaten them, but because it challenges the assumption they had that you would always be there. That's what creates the ego hit. The ego hit is the realization that you're not orbiting anymore. The ego hit is the possibility that you're moving on. The ego hit is the loss of the control lever. They didn't even know they were using silence. When you used to chase, silence was a lever. They could pull away and you would react. They could disappear and you would fill the gap. They could return and you would reset. That lever kept them safe because it kept you attached. But when you detach, the lever stops working. Silence doesn't trigger you the same way. Distance doesn't bring you closer. The pattern breaks. And that's when their nervous system starts to feel something it avoided, vulnerability. Now here's where your audience needs guidance, because this moment can be confusing. They see the avoidant checking, hovering, watching, reaching out, and they think, they miss me. Sometimes they do. But the more important question is, do they value you enough to change the behavior that caused the loss? Because missing without change is just longing. It's not love you can build on. So the mirror is doing two things at once. It's showing them what they lost, and it's showing you what's real. If they can look into that mirror with maturity, they will come back with accountability. They will name what happened. They will offer a plan. They will repair. If they can't, they will come back with tests, with crumbs, with comfort seeking. And the moment you give full access, the mirror disappears and the old cycle returns. That's why this keynote is so powerful. It teaches the viewer not to confuse checking with growth. It teaches them that calm absence is the mirror, and what matters most is not whether the avoidant looks into it for a moment, but whether they are willing to change when they see themselves in it. And in the final part, I'll tell you exactly what to do if they hover back, one calm sentence that exposes whether it's real growth and repair, or the same cycle trying to restart. Because hovering is the moment where most people lose their power. They did the hardest part. They walked away peacefully. They stopped chasing. They reclaimed a little peace. And then one tiny signal from the avoidant pulls them right back into the old emotional gravity. A like. A random question. A late-night message that feels soft. And suddenly the nervous system wakes up. Hope surges and you start thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe they finally realized. Maybe they finally miss me. But if you've lived this before, you know how the story can go. They return just enough to restore comfort, and once they have access again, the same pattern returns: inconsistency, distance, silence, confusion. That's why the final part has to be practical, not emotional, not romantic, practical. Because in an avoidant cycle, feelings can be real and still not be safe. Missing can be real and still not be mature. Regret can be real and still not produce change. So what you need is a filter, a clean way to separate comfort, seeking from capacity. Here's the calm sentence. What will you do differently next time you feel overwhelmed and want to pull away? One sentence. Calm tone, no accusations, no long speech, no explaining why you're asking. The sentence itself carries the boundary because it demands a plan, not a vibe. It demands responsibility, not nostalgia. It asks for behavior, not emotion. This is why it works. Avoidant relationships often survive on ambiguity. Ambiguity keeps hope alive. Ambiguity keeps you in the gray zone. I miss you is ambiguous. I've been thinking about you is ambiguous. I'm sorry can be ambiguous. They can say those things and still disappear again because nothing has been structured. Nothing has been repaired. Nothing has changed. But when you ask, what will you do differently? You shift the conversation from the past to the future. You shift from explanation to strategy. You shift from emotion to consistency. And you force the avoidant to reveal something that words alone can't hide: their willingness and ability to take responsibility for their pattern. Someone who is returning for real growth will not run from this question. They may feel nervous, but they will engage. They will acknowledge. They will own it. They will say, I shut down. I disappear when I'm overwhelmed. I see that it hurts you. Next time I will communicate earlier. I'll ask for space clearly. I'll give you a time frame. I'll follow through. I'll come back to talk instead of vanishing. That's a plan. And the presence of a plan is evidence of capacity. Someone who is returning for comfort will resist the question. They will dodge it. They will minimize. They will try to keep it light. They might say, why are you making it serious? They might say, you're overthinking. They might say, can't we just move on? They might flip it and blame you for wanting safety. That response is also an answer. It tells you they want the warmth without the work. They want access without accountability. They want the old cycle, because the old cycle lets them regulate through distance, while still keeping you emotionally available. This is where your detachment becomes real, because detachment isn't silence forever. Detachment is self-respect that stays steady even when the door knocks. It's not you punishing them. It's you protecting yourself. It's you refusing to restore the emotional oxygen without proof of change. It's you being kind, but not collapsible. So what do you do after you ask the question? You listen for three things. Ownership. Do they acknowledge their pattern without excuses, or do they justify it with, I was busy, I was stressed, that's just how I am? Empathy. Do they recognize the impact on you, or do they treat your feelings like inconvenience? A plan. Do they offer a clear behavioral change, or do they give vague promises like, I'll try, and then you watch behavior over time, not hours? Because avoidance can become emotional in the moment and still revert when intimacy rises again. So you don't hand over full access immediately. You don't rush back into full intimacy. You let consistency earn closeness. You let communication earn trust. You let repair earn reconnection. That's not cold. That's healthy. This final keynote is also where you redefine what success looks like. Success is not them coming back. Success is you no longer being available for a loop. If they come back with maturity, you can rebuild. If they come back with comfort seeking, you can stay calm and step back. Either way you win, because you're no longer bargaining with silence. You're no longer chasing proof that you mattered. You're no longer handing your nervous system to someone else's pattern. And here's the quiet power of it all. When you walk away peacefully and hold your standards when they hover back, you communicate something stronger than any speech. You communicate that your love is real, but your peace is not negotiable. And that one truth ends the cycle, because the cycle only survives when you abandon yourself to keep it alive.